welcome to the video. In this one, we're going to talk about the new and improved track walk feature of version 2022.4 of the Z1 Analyzer. So the track walk is a feature which has existed before in different versions of the Analyzer, but has been completely overhauled and improved for this version. So a track walk is basically where you walk around the track before you would drive it. And the idea is to get accustomed to the turns. How would you take these turns? What's the best gear to be in? What's a good line? Get various reference points, things like that. So that when you go out to drive it, you don't have to spend 5 or 10 laps just figuring out how do I drive around this track. So it gets you up to speed much faster. So it really complements the driving instructor because you would use the track walk first, then you would go out and drive some laps, have those be recorded, and then come back and look at them in the driving instructor to see how you can improve. And the track walk is specific to the car. So if you are looking to drive a Porsche 911 GT3 at a certain track, the advice given in the track walk will be different than if you were driving a Formula One car at that same track, because obviously speeds, turn-in points, gears, and things like that will be different. So this is a longish video because we're going to go through each turn at Laguna Seca, but please stay to the end because we think it's very useful to see how this works and how you would use it. So with that said, let's get started. So here we are in the Z1 Analyzer, and this is version 2022.4. And so when you start up the Analyzer, you get this introduction dialog. So you can choose basically what you want to do. You can just track walk the driving instructor, or you can say you're an intermediate or you're an advanced user. And if you don't want to see this in future starts, you just click don't show this again. So for this video, we're talking about track walks, so we want to look at the track walk. So we're going to hit the go button right here under the track walk feature. And then we get opened up in the Analyzer. The layout is for the track walk, so it's really easy to get here. And as we mentioned, the purpose of doing the track walk is to look at a lap for a certain track and a certain car before you actually go out and drive it. So we don't have a lap to load because we haven't driven one. We're interested and we're going to go to a track. So what's the best way to look at this particular track in a certain type of car? So in this case, it says there's no lap loaded, so choose the sim, track, and car. So we're going to choose iRacing. And right now there's Assetto Corsa, Competizione, and iRacing available. More will be added to this as we move forward. So we're choosing iRacing, and you get all the lists of various tracks here that you can choose from. So if you had chosen that track, for example, you would get all these different cars that you want to select from. We are actually going to look at Laguna Seca because it is a good track to show various types of corners and show how those are handled in the track walk. So we're going to go down here and choose Laguna Seca. And then we're going to choose, in this case, the 991 GT3 Cup car. So we're going to do that and click Show Track Walk. So then what happens is it gets loaded in and you get this overview of the whole track with the corners highlighted. And then up here you get general stats about the particular track. So in this case, it's 2.2 miles. Our goal lap time will be a 1:26.2 to a 1:27.1. So if we can get in that range, we know we're doing really, really well. And again, this is car specific. So if I had chosen a different car for the same track, you obviously have a different lap time goal. And then just sort of general stats. It's full throttle just over 50% of the time, top speed about 140, and your average speed is about 92 miles an hour. And these are in settings, in units that I would prefer. If you want to have it in kilometers, you can have that as well. And then over here, there's show instructions or hide instructions, depending on what you are seeing on your screen. This shows you what you can do to manipulate things in the track walk. So you have mouse control left click displays information on a turn. Left click and drag moves the track around, so we can drag it around. You can zoom in by doing a control left click and drag. So if I wanted to zoom in, I can do that to zoom in. And double clicking takes you back out, or you can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. I'm going to hide this because I don't need this at the moment. And also all those options are configurable in the settings dialog. So we're going to go through this one turn at a time and show you how you would use this when you're preparing to go out on the track. So we're going to start with turn number 1. So we're going to click on that, and it zooms into the turn, and let's look at this. So first of all, this is turn 1. It says so right here. And on the right here, you get sort of general information about this turn. So this is a 6-gear left-hand turn. That means you'll be in 6th gear when you get to the apex point right here. And you don't need to brake for this. So this, in Laguna Seca, is hardly even really a turn, but it's still considered one, so it gets discussed. Then you have approximate speeds. You start in this here at about 131. At the apex, you should be doing about 136. And then at this point, you're doing 124. The reason it's lower on this turn is because you're starting to brake at this point for the following turn. But the average speed through here is 135, so it's a fast turn. And then if more statistics, if you want that, it's the length of the turn, the elevation change, and the angle of the turn. So for turns, obviously elevation is important. You can click the Show Elevation button here, and you get these white lines which show up to represent what the elevation is doing in this turn. So in this case, the lowest point of the turn is at the end of it down here, and the highest point is up here, and it's basically as these lines get smaller and smaller, it means that the turn is going downhill. Because the wider the line, the higher the elevation. So this basically, you're going downhill the whole way through this turn. I'm going to hide that for a moment. And now I can also play the corner. So if I hit play this corner, you get a representation here of the car driving through the corner. And this is actually at half speed. If it went through at full speed, it'd be too quick really to see. But on the left side, you have a speedometer and what you're doing with the throttle and brake. So if the circle is fully green, it means you're full on the throttle. If it's fully red, you're full on the brakes. Or if it's somewhere in between, you're partially on the throttle or partially on the brakes. And then inside the circle, you have the current speed at that point. And on the right side, you have your gear display. So it tells you what gear you're in at that point in the corner. So this is really useful to see the exact car placement and to see speeds and what you're doing with the various inputs as you drive through this turn. I'm going to stop that for a moment. Then we also have on this turn the apex point, which is right here, and the turn-in point, which is here. So obviously this is not a very sharp turn, so the turn-in is a very subtle turn-in. So now we're going to move on to turn number 2, which is down here. So we're going to control click on that, and we get the information on turn 2. So turn 2 is much more complex than turn 1. And as you see here, this is a 2nd gear double apex left-hand turn. And you have to brake hard for this turn. So we'll start with braking, as that's the first thing you would do. So that's up here. And the brake is an 8 pedal. So when we are in the track walk, when we're talking about brake, how hard you brake, it goes from a 0 pedal to a 10 pedal. So a 0 pedal is you're not touching the brakes at all. And a 10 pedal is brake as hard as you possibly can, but you don't want to lock the wheels up. So an 8 pedal is 80% of as hard as you can brake. And if it was a 5 pedal, that would be medium brake, and something like a 2 would be pretty light brake. So in this case, it's an 8. So you're braking pretty hard at this point. And you're going to start to brake about here. So this is pretty much right where the curbing starts. You should be on the brakes. And then you come down here to the next thing is the turn-in. And the turn-in point is down a little bit past this brake marker right here. So one thing to comment on about turn-in points. We are defining the turning point as when you are starting to turn the wheel more than just a few degrees. Because most of the time when you come to a turn, you're not going to drive into the turn and then just like crank the wheel over immediately. You're going to gently turn the wheel, either to the left or to the right as you approach that turn. So the turning point may seem earlier than you would think because you're not turning the wheel very much, but you're starting to turn the wheel. And that's what this is. You're starting to turn the wheel here just as you pass this final brake marker. On the right here, and then you gradually turn the wheel in more as you go, as you approach the rest of the turn. Now we can come down here and we can see that there's apex 1 here and 2 here, so that's why it's a double apex, because you have to come in, hit this first apex on the curb here, then you drift out a bit, and then you pull it back in for the second apex over here. And again, the 2, this is just, we're at turn 2 at this point. So double apex, first one and second one. And then the full throttle point is right here. So this is when you want to be back to full throttle. It's sort of just before the edge, the end of the turn-in of the corner. So the curb is kind of ended, back to full throttle. And then you can see the line taking all the way out, getting right up to this curb here, and then moving back towards the middle. Again, on the right here, you have your speeds. So you're coming in at 139, at the apex 1, 52, and apex 2, 54, and then at the end, 90 miles an hour. And again, these are approximations. You don't have to be hitting exactly 52 miles an hour, but you want to be pretty close to it. If you're coming in here and you're finding that you're doing it at 45, well, you're really, really slow. Or if you're flying in and at apex 1 you're doing like 60, you're probably overshooting later in the turn. So even though you're faster there, you're going to be losing out later on. So this is a good guide to see how fast you should be doing in the turn. And again, second gear at these apexes. And you can show the elevation on this turn as well. As you can see here, zoom out a bit. It starts off, very much downhill all the way into this first apex, and then it kind of levels off. And the second part of the turn is flat. There's no real elevation at this point. So as this is downhill, you would know that you're going to have a bit less braking. And so you're more likely to lock the wheels up, which is why this will be an 8 pedal as opposed to a 10. If you went right to 10 as you're coming down, it's much more likely to lock those wheels. And then if you want, you can play the corner and watch the car come in and see what the speeds are, where the gear changes are, and what you're doing with the brake and the throttle at the various points in the turn to see, what's best for you. I'm going to stop that for a moment. So now let's move on to turn number 3 at Laguna Seca. And we can just click on this one. And so this is a third gear right-hand turn with moderate braking. So as you can see here, the brake pedal is a 7. So it's a little bit less than what we were doing into the previous turn. The turn-in point comes fairly soon after the brake pedal. After the braking point. You get to the turn-in. And again, it's just a gentle turn, so you're gently starting to turn the car in, and you'll get more and more input as you get closer. So you can see here that you're starting to turn in midway through this curb. And when you get to the end of the curb, because the curb kind of has these sort of triangular ends here, that's when you're really starting to get more of the turn in going. But you want to start it a bit early. You don't want to wait till here and then crank over, because you'll probably end up missing the apex if you do that. And then the apex for this turn is, basically the middle of the curb, maybe a bit later, and you're back to full throttle right at the end of the triangular part of this curbing here, going all the way out to the curb on the other side. Use the whole width of the track here, and you've got your different speeds. Coming in at about 100, you're doing about 68 here, and at the end of this turn here, you should be up to about 95 or so, with average speed of 81. And let's look at the elevation quickly. So this turn, there's really no elevation change at all. It comes up a little bit here, as you can see here. The elevation change is only 2.6 feet, so nothing really to speak of. All right, let's continue on. Let's look at turn number 4. So turn 4, this is a 4th gear right-hander, and it's, again, very little elevation change, only 3 feet, so we're not really going to look at that. And this is your turn-in and your brake pedal are happening almost at the exact same time. You're starting to brake and you're gently turning in at the same point, with the end of the curbing being where you're really starting to get more of your turning dialed in. But again, you don't want to wait to that point to start. You want to start here. Hitting the apex again around the middle of the curb, and then tracking all the way out to the edge and getting full throttle here in the curbing. There are going to be some times when you'll look at this and you're like, well, why can't I get on full throttle way back here? If you're doing that, it probably means you are not carrying enough speed through the turn. And yeah, while you'll be on the throttle sooner, you're slower the whole way through the turn. So the reason you can't, it's saying that you don't get to full throttle here is because you should be carrying speed through the turn. And if you got to full throttle, you end up being too fast here and overshooting. So let's continue on to turn number 5. And starting to get some elevation change in this one at 24.6 feet. So let's just show that to see how it is. And we can see it's flat at the beginning, it's the end has the elevation. So because the end has the elevation, you can be on the gas really soon because you have this the uphill to help you. So you're on full throttle right after the apex pretty much. And to carry that then all the way up this hill. So hide the elevation. And then as we come into this, it's another hard braking zone. And this one's you're braking in a straight line for quite a long time. And then just past the end of the curbing right here, this is where you would start to turn in. And then just bring it in to the apex and full throttle right after the apex and carry it on out. And you're in third gear. And again, if you want to play this, you can play and see how you shift and where your points are. So I'm in third at this point. Right here it says you're in third. Still going through the apex and then back to full throttle and just drive it out all the way up this hill. Using all the road right to the edge of the curb there. And we just zoomed all the way out quickly so we can see the whole track. So now we're going to go to turn 6. So this is a pretty quick turn, 4th gear, left-hander. And again, this part here, you want to get a good exit because the straight following this is a medium speed one. So the exit is important. You'll carry a lot of speed up this hill, and if you are a bit slower on the exit, you won't you'll be losing out the whole way up the hill. So if you look at this, again, the apex point and the full throttle point are basically the exact same place. As soon as you hit this apex in the middle here, back to full power and carry on up the hill all the way. And you're braking at a 7 pedal coming in, so moderately hard. Turning in a little bit before the end of this curbing, and then hit the apex in the middle, full throttle, and go up in its 4th gear through this turn. So let's continue on to the most interesting turn in this course, the corkscrew. So it's turns 7 and 8, and these are discussed as one turn because it's one big motion. Even though it's 2 different corners, we discuss it as one turn. And it says on here, so this includes corners 7 and 8. And you want to use the braking here as moderate braking, and you're starting, if you can zoom in here, starting just basically at the end of the curbing is a good brake point to use. And then you've got your 2 apexes, one here and one here. This is fairly obvious. And the turn-in point looks fairly late, but you're actually, because the course moves, you're kind of going in a straight line from here up to here. Just the course turns to the left, turns to the right, and you're basically straight lining it until you get to this point, at which point, yeah, you got to turn in, otherwise you're going to miss this. And of course, we definitely want to look at elevation on this. So let's show the elevation because it is huge here. Now you can see the widest part of the white line is around here at the highest point of the track. And so you're coming uphill because it's a bit narrower here. You're coming uphill. So this is going to help you under braking. Then you want to be off the brakes and you're going to start going downhill at this point very significantly because you can see how the lines narrow very quickly, especially when you get down here. And so your full throttle is you're past the curb here. And once you're past the curb and you're pretty much straight net, you can get back to full throttle. But you're probably not going to be doing it in the middle of this because you're going downhill so quickly. So let's hide the elevation. And we're actually going to play this one to see what's going on. So let's play this corner. You can see here we're braking all the way in, still braking. And then we start to turn in here and we're coming off the brakes, back on the throttle just to steady it a little bit. And we're not back to full, we're just sort of keeping a decent amount. And then we get back to full once we are through this whole downhill left-right section. Because you're really going to lose a lot of grip because of the downhill aspect. If you get on the gas too soon, probably going to spin or go very wide or something like that. So that's why the advice is not to get on until you're straightened out and going down this hill. All right, approaching the end of the lap, just a few more corners to talk about. So turn 9, this is a third gear left-hander, and there's a little bit of braking. This is one of the more gentle ones. It says a 4 pedal. So you remember our braking scale was from a 0 to a 10, with a 0 being not braking at all, and a 10 being as hard as you can possibly brake. So a 4, that's 40%. You know, you're braking not a lot, but you need to slow down the car a little bit. And then here's your turn in, again nearing the end of the curbing, apex in the middle of this curb, and then you get back to full throttle once you are sort of midway between this curb and the next one over here. And it's a third gear left-hander, so you know you should be in third gear as you go through this. And again, this one is also continuing downhill. So this is the highest point and this is the lowest point. It's downhill all the way through. So the car is going to want to push wide because of the downhill, so you want to leave yourself a little bit of extra wiggle room here, especially during a race. In a qualifying lap, maybe just go for it, and if you go a little bit off, not the end of the world, but leave yourself a bit of room there. All right, let's move on to turn number 10. Fourth gear, right-hand turn, as it says right here, and this is used as a 7 pedal on braking, so you know, pretty good. And you're braking a little bit before the curbing. So there's also this sort of service road that goes off here. You can use that as a brake point too. Basically, when the service road starts to diverge, you want to be on the brakes at that point. And then you're turning in just past, well, right at the end of the apex. Sorry, under the apex. You're turning in right at the end of the curbing here. And then you're hitting the apex in the middle of this curb and back to full throttle immediately after. And tracking all the way out to the edge, you know, there's a little bit of curb here, you can use this. You know, go on to the next turn. And let's see what's happening. So with elevation. We're still continuing downhill, but once you get to the apex, you're pretty much flat from that point on. So be a little bit wary of the downhill because it's in your brake zone, so you'll have a little bit less grip. But from the apex onwards, it's easy. No real elevation change at that point. And then the last turn is turn number 11. This is a second gear left-hand turn. You've got to brake pretty hard for this. And then here, a good exit is very important because you're going on to the longest straight on the track, and you want to carry that speed all the way down that straight. So braking point here, the start of the curb, use that as your braking point, and then you're turning in. There are these 2 markers here you can see, or if those don't work for you, the end of the grass, or lots of places here you can use the turn-in point. But you're turning in here again gently, and then more and more and more. Once you get to the end of this curbing here, if you waited to turn into here, it's going to be too late, and you're just going to wash wide. So a little bit before the end of that curbing. Apex, right in the middle of this, your car is going to be right up on the curbs here as we go through. And then full throttle basically as soon as you can afterwards, because again, you want to carry the speed all the way down the next long straight. And you go all the way out to the curb here on the exit. So the elevation change is only 4.9 feet, so we're not going to really bother looking at that. But we'll play the corner back, and we can see what the car is doing here as you go through. Because we're in second gear, about 50 miles an hour, 45 actually. Back to full throttle, use the curb on the exit, and get on going down that straight, because you have a long way to go down into the first turn to start your next lap. So you made it to the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And remember, the track walk is a great way to look at the track and the car before you get in it, to save you time and to get you up to speed faster. And that's what the analyzer is about, is helping you get faster as quickly as possible. So you go and you use the track walk before you are going to go out on track. Or of course, you can come back and reference it later if you want. And then after you've driven some laps and you want feedback on how you specifically drove a lap, then you should go and use the driving instructor. And we have videos for that in the channel, and there'll be links to them in the description below. So Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.